next guest, toxicologist turned pastor Sean Ellis, will uncover the hidden, often overlooked causes of illnesses in our home. He worked over 20 years as a consultant/detective, uncovering indoor environmental causes of unexplained illnesses. Stay tuned to hear the story of the lazy dad.
Baransu Balance podcast with Dr. Ince emphasizes the interdependence and importance of a healthy mind, body, and soul.
Hello, Pastor Sean Ellis.
Hello, how are you doing?
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Well, you introduced my title, which is a pastor, but getting to be a pastor was actually quite a journey. Before I was a pastor, I was actually a toxicologist, specifically consulting in the area of indoor environmental quality. I did that for about 20 years, running my own company. And then God actually called me into ministry. And so when he called, of course, when God calls you, you answer. And so I left that behind, and I'm now going from the world of science to the science of soul winning. And I've been ministering for the number of years, almost 6 years now in the church. And I'm actually at the conference office for communications and media. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Okay. Well, that is absolutely fascinating. So you are in Toronto, Canada, and I understand that you said before you became a pastor, you were in the environmental toxicology business.
That's correct.
So this podcast is dedicated to promoting health and a healthy balance between the mind, body, and soul. So today, Pastor Ellis, we have a 2-for-1, body and soul.
Amen.
Okay. So I met you in Lexington, Kentucky, when you gave a lecture, and it was on the technical aspect of your past career. And at that time, I knew I wanted to interview you. So it's not too often that you remember something from over 6 months ago. And I'd like to jump right into one of the stories that you related at that time. I remember there was the story of the lazy dad.
Okay. The lazy dad. Yes. You know, in my field, there's so many stories, so I like to try to give them titles. And this one was the lazy dad. So picture with me, if you will, I walk into a house. I'm doing my consulting work. I've been actually hired to consult. And when the door opens, there is this man wearing an actual gas mask. Not a COVID fiber mask, but an actual gas mask. So I'm pausing thinking, okay, what is going on here? And I sit down and I get his story, and the story goes something like this. Essentially, they moved into this house, beautiful older house, and he started not feeling well. And it was getting progressively weird symptoms. So sometimes it would be headaches, sometimes he wouldn't be able to eat, a variety of weird symptoms. But he was the only one that was experiencing it. And because these symptoms were really affecting the quality of his life, it affected engagement with his family. And so the family actually thought, hey, for the kids, like, you know what, dad's just lazy. The wife was thinking, I don't know what's going on, but he's not interested in the family anymore. So they were kind of desperate. And at the end, they decided, hey, you know what? We are going to get an air quality test done. Dad said, I got to try something. Show my family I'm actually normal.
Okay. So you were like an investigator, a private investigator.
Very much so. Indoor air quality is never obvious. It's very rarely obvious, I should say that. And so people suffer from all kinds of symptoms. And of course,
we spend most of our time indoors. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. If you think about it, if you go from the time that you wake up, even the time that you spend commuting, you'll realize that you're spending about 70 to 80% of your time indoors. So in our indoor environment has a real big impact on our health and well-being, and actually our wealth as well, because in this case, this dad had a real challenge getting his work done. So when I began the investigation, we looked at the structure of the building. The building itself looked fine. It looked beautiful. And so we started to do certain air tests. And there's a range of air tests that we can do. But to get focused, we decided to do one on mold and fungi. Now, mold and fungi, these are natural like plant-like organisms. I say they're like plants because they do need water to grow and something to grow on, but they're not like plants in the sense that they can grow in absolute darkness. And they are God's recyclers in the environment. Their job is to break things down and turn it back into soil. So they're not necessarily a threat or an issue, but they can be if they're inside the home in a significant amount. Okay. So we did an air quality test for mold, and we actually found that there were high levels of mold throughout this house. And it was very strange because the way we do it is we test inside and outside, and we compare the two because there's always mold around outside and inside. So is the mold that we're finding way higher or substantially different inside than outside? And if that's the case, which was in this situation, we know we had a problem.
So we have this. There wasn't any black mold in the showers or the.
No, we didn't see anything. The house was very, like, to the naked eye, it was beautiful. You know, it was the kind of house that all of us would want to live in, and they had got a great deal on it and everything. So we actually had to start looking behind the wall. And we started taking apart the house section by section. And what we found was that there was a lot of mold behind in the insulation, behind the walls, in various places. That was what was causing this indoor air quality problem. And the reason it was there was because the house previously had a renovation done to sell it. So the people that renovated it, they didn't do it out of malice, you know, because back then at that time, you know, we didn't really know as much about mold and its impact as we did now. So they just said, hey, it looks bad. We'll put some nice drywall over it.
Just cover it up.
And just cover it up. And that's still very common today, not so much in terms of people covering it up, but not thinking it's an issue. So they'll just put something over it and just continue on. So we ended up, because it was so extensive in this house, we ended up having to use, we ripped out big chunks of the structure and had to use dry ice blasting to get it off the structure itself. Wow. And after about 3 months of work, we restored the house, put it back together, and the lazy dad, his symptoms just mysteriously evaporated.
Wow. And so that saved his marriage and
you know, and this was one of the more touching cases for me, because up until that point, you know, a lot of the work I did was very technical, but you could see the actual emotional impact. Here is a family that actually thought their dad didn't care, thought their dad was just lazy. And when the problem was solved and his health came back, now the whole family had almost an emotional reunion, because they realized, man, we were blaming you. Husband, you know, I thought you just didn't care. And in fact, it was something.
Is there a moral? Is there a moral to this story somewhere? Besides, don't buy a house that has hidden mold.
Yeah, I think the moral, the larger moral, is when something happens to someone that you love, their behavior is out of whack. You know, sometimes you want to go to the easy conclusion, which is, in this case, they're lazy or they just don't want to try.
Or need to have a psychiatric evaluation.
You know, let's look deeper and see if maybe there's something in the environment, because as we're all becoming more aware, our environment has a really big impact on our well-being.
Okay, so Pastor Sean Ellis. Let's move on to the second story that you told us about. And this one kind of hits home because I think I diagnosed a problem with my husband. Now, I'm a physician of 40 plus years, but I think that you got this one.
Okay.
So tell us the story of the woman who always had colds, especially during the winter. No one else in her family did.
Okay, I'll share that. And before I do, I want to explain to your viewers and listeners why we seem to have so many more indoor air quality problems. And it's really come because we are now trying to save energy. And by saving energy, it means that we have to make our houses tighter. So instead of letting the houses breathe like they used to, we say, well, no, that's a waste of energy. Let's take away the drafts. And that means we're now holding things in our environment that before would have been breathed out.
So the expensive doors and windows sealing out so the air condition doesn't escape, but there's a lot of other things that get trapped inside.
Exactly. And a good example of that is if you spray an air freshener, that smell will linger. Even when you go out and you come back, you'll still be able to smell it because your house is keeping it inside. So that's what all of our modern houses do.
So another, I guess, takeaway is that it's a good idea to open up the windows every now and then and let some fresh air in.
Absolutely. So now with that, let me get back to that story. So in this case, it was the woman with the dry cough. So here's this young mother in, relatively mid-30s thereabouts. And again, it comes with this symptom of this constant cough and getting colds. And her doctor would check her out and says, no, your respiratory system looks fine. You don't have asthma, but she kept getting colds at regular intervals and she always had a cough. And the doctor just had no idea. So they said, look, maybe you need to get your home assessed. So in this case, I was called in by the physician to look at the home. And again, the home, you always do a visual inspection because there are some times where you can see right off the bat things that are causing a problem. But in this case, there was nothing to see. We did some.
There wasn't any cat hair flying through the air or.
No cat hair or anything that you would say, okay, this could be generating dust and causing a respiratory problem. But what it was, in the end, when we did a range of tests, it came out to be something that's relatively simple, and that's humidity. So in this house, especially in the winter, what would happen is the air would get very dry. So, the humidity in your house, let's say in the summer months, might be somewhere in the 40% range. And for our respiratory system, that's a decent range. Inside it gets moist in our respiratory system. So anything that helps keep that moisture, upper air tract, lower air tract, that's good. But what had happened in this person's house is that the moisture level had dropped down almost close to just above the 20%. Now that's not an uncommon thing with older houses in the winter. And it just has to do with the moist air from outside coming in. It dries itself out on the building structure. And so, because the building itself, think of it this way, it's like a sponge that's been wrung dry. And so any moist air coming in, the building structure is absorbing it, meaning that there's less air, moist air for us to breathe. So because it was so dry, when you get into that lower humidity range, immediately it dries out your mucous membranes. And depending on how sensitive you are, you might find your throat is dry and you might then have a cough. And if it's dried out enough, it can actually break down some of the protective surface linings in your system. And so you become more susceptible to viruses and colds and things like that.
So you start off with a cough and then wind up with an actual cold.
That's
virus,
right.
and then maybe even possible even pneumonia eventually.
Mhm. Oh,
Back.
yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. You know, the way I like to make an analogy of it is if you think about it, if you're in constant dry air, very dry air, it's like sandpaper against your system. Okay, you know, at first it's a little interesting sensation, but once it starts to really work its way, you don't really have protective linings to barrier
Okay.
against things that you normally barrier against.
Okay, the little hair and the mucus that helps get rid of the foreign substances.
And then that means other things that wouldn't normally be an irritant become an irritant. So in her case, because the system was so dry, and I should add, she always noticed this at certain times of year, though she didn't realize that it was really in the winter.
And
That's
no one else in her family had that problem?
Now, this is one of the interesting things with a lot of indoor air quality problems. It's in almost every building. There's some people that are more robust than others. So the husband, the kids, they didn't have that issue.
Okay.
And often too, you'll notice it tends to affect the person that stays in that building most of the time. So with a
Okay.
lazy dad, for example, he worked from home. The kids, they were out at school. The mom, she went to work. So they weren't being exposed as much as the dad. And in the case of the mom, she, again, I guess her system and the time that she spent there, she was exposed at a higher level.
Okay.
So the answer to this, thank goodness, is quite simple. You just go to your local hardware store, you pick up a little meter, and it's probably about $25. It's digital. You put in the batteries, and it will tell you, there you go. Right. So let's see that humidity there. That was on
I think
your
it's backwards, but
oh,
this
it's
one says
46%.
46%. We're in
That's great.
very hot here in Louisiana, and you're in
Ah,
Canada,
that's right.
but
That's right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so 46% is great. So here in Canada, at this time of year, the humidity would still be relatively high, but as we get into winter, the inside humidity would lower down. So once you have that humidity meter, then what she had to do is just do some portable humidification. So you get a portable humidifier, and that would help to raise it up in her bedroom. She looked at getting one also for the furnace as well. There are some that can go on your furnace and produce humidity throughout the house as well. And all of a sudden, miraculously, it seemed, her condition improved and she was fine.
Okay,
So it's
voila.
another example.
Okay, at this point, I should put in a medical disclaimer.
Hmm.
Please consult your local physician or primary care provider for any persistent cough or other symptoms and help with investigations of these chronic coughs.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
my husband, how this resonated with me because my husband would have a chronic congestion and cough, but I noticed it was mostly during the winter, and he was absolutely fine when he traveled to Trinidad, his home
Mhm.
country, where the windows were open and the humidity was probably close to 100%. But anyway, okay.
Well, interestingly enough, um, you know, when it comes to humidity, it can also affect snoring. So I know some people
Yes,
that snore
I
like
didn't
a
mention
freight
that.
train.
I didn't
Yeah,
mention that, but yes.
yeah. So you know, you've experienced, you've walked the walk in this one. So you know, in a dry area, your snoring could be really loud, and then with the humidity, the airway gets moist, and you don't snore as much.
But Pastor Ellis, this is not really something they tell us a lot about in medical school, or maybe I missed that chapter, but it's it's very interesting. So can we I think there was one other story I'd like you to relay, and I believe it was about an older woman in a high-rise apartment.
Mhm. Yes, actually, this was an older couple.
Okay.
And this one was really interesting. So they were in a high-rise apartment,
Mhm.
and their children, because it was a senior couple, their children called us in or called me in at that time to assess their apartment. Again, they were having all these kind of symptoms, everything from sleepiness to a variety of like headaches, and other ailments. Their doctor would check them out and said, no, they're fine. Yes, they're senior, but they seem to be fine. And it normally starts that way. Indoor air quality problems, when people are going to get an assessment, normally starts from something that they can't figure out, their doctor can't figure out, and they say, maybe it's your house. And in this case, I went, and again, it's very well kept house. But I did notice, this was in the summer, it was very hot, very hot. That's the way they liked it, and that's the way the building was structured. It was one of these buildings where you had to have a portable window air conditioner.
Okay,
But in this case,
that's the way it is in many places in the north part of the United States, without central air.
And so they had a lot of heat, but what I noticed was that they also had these beautiful couches that were wrapped in plastic. Like I guess part of their culture was they didn't want to, you get these nice couches, you don't want to get them dirty, so you left them wrapped in plastic. So it kind of gave me a clue, and we did some tests. We did some chemical air tests in this situation. And we found that the level of chemicals in the air, there's a way to measure it. You don't measure individual chemicals because there's so many chemicals in the air we breathe in our homes. You would be shocked. It's not hundreds, it's literally thousands.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Some of them fall under the, what is it, the forever chemicals?
Oh yes, some of them would, with those as well. And one of the ways I like to express to people is walk down your grocery aisle of the cleaners, the cleaning section. You always get a whiff of those cleaners, even though they're tightly capped. So you can imagine those chemicals in your house are really everywhere. So what we do is we don't measure individual ones. It's really one that's so many. We will do it under very specific circumstances, but we sort of measure a group of them, and we have a measure called total volatile organic chemicals. So it's kind of like saying all of them together is this number.
Okay.
And their level of total volatile organic chemicals was extremely high, well above a normal level. And so what I believed was that it was coming from their couch. Because when you have any new product, it's not as bad as it used to be, but it still is. You bring in any new product and you have what's called off-gassing. So it's a new product, whatever the chemicals are, they just release into the air of your home. Now, this apartment was not very big, so because these are couches and they make up a big section of the house, they're releasing, relative to the size, a lot of chemicals.
Okay.
So the couches were beautiful. So we're not going to say get rid of them, because even if they got new ones, they would off-gas too.
Okay.
So we had to figure out a way to sort of reduce the amount of chemicals coming off.
Volatile chemicals.
Exactly. And so what we decided to do was use the way the building works, because normally in a tall building you have an airflow called the stack effect. Air rises up like the chimney stack, and then into your apartment. Sometimes that doesn't work, and that's why when you walk down an apartment, you might smell the food from your neighbors, because the stack effect is not working. And when it's not working, that causes other problems, but those are other stories. Anyway, so the air normally goes up into the apartment. So what we did is we asked them to put just a simple window fan that fits in the window, pushing air out.
Oh, okay.
Because the heat in the unit was so high, it was going to cause more chemicals to come off. Just think about if you bake some, like if you put a spice in a pan with some oil when it's cold, you don't smell anything. But when you turn the heat on and the oil starts to heat up spice, you smell the spice, right?
Okay.
So it's the same kind of idea. We let the heat lift out the chemicals out of the couch, and then we use the window fan to suck it out of the unit. And
Okay.
so we allowed that to happen for about, I'm going to say 2 weeks. I think it was about 2 weeks. And then afterwards, we came back, we tested, and the air quality in the unit was much better. And when the seniors came back to live, their symptoms were again gone. So
Wow.
it's amazing that sometimes these changes can really have a huge impact,
Okay.
because they didn't have the headaches, they didn't have the fatigue, they didn't have these other random symptoms, and they still had their beautiful couches.
Okay. So the new smell um, is not always good. As a matter of fact, it's not good.
That's
Like
right.
from your rugs, your sofa, your new car smell. Try to
Mhm,
get rid of,
mhm.
open up the windows.
In fact, I had a client once that told me that every time they buy a new car, they have to bake it out because the smell is just too much for them. So that first couple of weeks, they just buy it in the summer, and they
Mhm.
leave it somewhere with the windows rolled down to help bake out the new car smell.
Okay. Well,
Mhm.
that's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing this information. I understand that you were the president of Building Health Center for 20 years and that you examined over 1,000 buildings. And now
Mhm.
you are in the business of saving souls.
That's right. That's
Eh,
right. And I have to say this, it's quite
mhm,
interesting because even in the Bible, I talked about the lazy dad. And in
mhm.
the Bible, in the book of Leviticus, it actually talks about dealing with mold in buildings.
Oh,
It actually goes through a process that is remarkably similar to the modern day version of that process, which
okay.
is you go in and you inspect the building. If it seems like the mold is growing, then you have to take those materials out. And in the Bible, it says, cast it out from the city outskirts. We essentially dispose of it in a safe, disposable manner into a landfill site. And it's
Okay.
remarkable how, all the way back at the time of Leviticus, God had a plan of dealing with mold contaminated buildings as well.
That is amazing. That is amazing.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
any final thoughts before you leave us?
mhm. I would encourage everybody, now that you've heard some of the stories, start thinking about the indoor air quality in your building. If you have a furnace, make sure you're changing your furnace filter regularly. If you have an air conditioner, are you checking to make sure it's clean? If you have cleaners, make a decision. Do you really need all of those cleaners in your house? Maybe sometimes we stockpile them. And as I said, all those scents go into the air, whether
Oh,
we want to or not. We might want to pare down or maybe find some that are more environmentally friendly.
more,
It's not about
more
getting rid of
natural.
everything. It's about really managing what we have well and being mindful of what we're bringing into our house and how it could affect our health.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Signing off. Until next time, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pastor Sean Ellis. So the case of the lazy dad was solved. Non-specific symptoms such as a sore throat, headaches, and fatigue may be related to your home. Check with your healthcare provider. Open windows. Let the fresh air in. As a cancer doctor, I recommend testing your home for radon. Radon is the number 2 cause of lung cancer after smoking. Tests can be found at your local hardware store. See attached references for further information. EPA.gov is a good source of information about indoor air quality. Until next time, this is Dr. Christine Ince wishing you a healthy, balanced mind, body, and soul. Please like, share, and hit the subscribe button. Thank you.